Welcome to another episode of Cal's Corner Radio here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. And again, the name of the show is Cal's Corner. And yes, it is a radio show. And on Cal's Corner, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal, which is a lot of different subjects. The executive producer of the show is, once again, the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, folks, today's show I'm excited about because it gives me a chance to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, and that has to do with a phenomenon that I've seen, especially since the rise of social media. And let me explain what it is. In America, we have a generation of people called millennials, and this isn't just America, it's worldwide, of course. These are people who are born around the millennium, as in around the year 2000. So they are the so-called young adults of the future of the so-called world, a future generation. They're going to be future leaders at some point. Now, if you combine what are called millennials with the rise of social media, it has become rather scary to observe this because, let's be honest, life, although it's tough, has never across the board been easier for most of the world. Everyone has smartphones now, okay? There's billions of them in use every day. And that's rather interesting, that impact and the ramifications of it, because let's be honest, Apple reinvented the phone. If it weren't for the iPhone that came out over 10 years ago, everyone would still be using a god-awful flip phone. But now everybody's got cameras. And so look at the subject of UFOs, for example. There used to be tons of videos that people would film with dedicated video cameras. Now you've got all kinds of fake videos that people do with software on their computer using footage from their smartphone. But yet, if you look at the number of UFO videos, they haven't spiked in proportion to the number of people who have smartphones. So there's two ways to interpret that data. Either the aliens are suddenly camera shy and they've decided that, well, we're not going to visit the Earth as often as we supposedly did because we don't want to be filmed by anybody's iPhone or Android phone, or it is undeniable evidence that there really isn't much going on there, and that what was claimed to be going on in the past just was hooey back in the days when people had to use real cameras, dedicated cameras, to fake their photos, like Billy Meyer did for many years in the 1970s. Billy Meyer, the Swiss UFO cult leader. That's the Billy Meyer I'm referring to. Now, what does this have to do with today's show and millennials and all of that? Well, it's all connected, because I'm not trying to quote Hillary Clinton here. I would never stoop so low. But it is a global community, meaning half the planet is online. On Facebook and elsewhere, every seventh person has statistically a mutual acquaintance. And that's just basically a fact. So I have many friends around the world. This is largely driven by the fact that I've been to 27 different countries. I have a lot of friends in India, of course. I've lived in India for 7 years. And of course, I have people who are friends in Pakistan. And I also have lost friends in Pakistan due to radical Islam, terrorists who have murdered friends of mine who were wonderful people trying to push Pakistan more away from its sponsorship of terrorism, giving women equal rights, having Pakistan, or hoping to help transform Pakistan into becoming a modern progressive democracy. But of course, Pakistan is not. It is instead a failed nation. So what you have in Pakistani culture, in parts of Muslim culture, let's be blunt about it, is you have this incredible hatred for Jews and Israel. And then when you drill down into that overall issue, there are nuances within that, okay? I'm not going to paint everyone with a broad brush because it wouldn't be accurate to do so. You have people who say, well, I don't hate Jews, I just don't like Zionists, although Zionists tend to be Jews. And then you have people who justify terrorist groups like Hamas, and they claim, oh no, they're part of the resistance. Well, they're not part of the resistance. They are terrorist groups. Hamas likes to use the term resistance because it's better for their marketing. If Hamas says, hey, come join us, we're a terrorist group, that's not good for marketing. That's not good for your image. But if they say, hey, it's a resistance to occupation, Then, of course, they use all these buzzwords and they fool gullible and naive people. So when I find that there are people out there who engage in these ridiculous excuses to justify the existence and the rule of a terrorist group like Hamas in Gaza, I like to engage them because I like to try to get them to think a little bit critically on this issue. And it's not that I'm perfect, but I'll admit I'm wrong when I know I am. And I've always had a standing offer as a longtime journalist going back decades now. I've had over 10,000 articles published in several books. I've got a couple more books coming out in May. And have this open offer. If I'm wrong on anything that I've published, tell me. I'll check it. And if it turns out I am wrong, I will print a retraction or a correction. And I can't be more straightforward or honest than that. But who's taking me up on the offer? Nobody. Why they're not doing it, I don't know. Maybe because I got things right. Maybe because what their claim is actually not factual. I don't know. I'd have to have somebody take me up on it in order to find out what the issue is. But I don't have an ego in this. That's what I'm saying. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And it has been my experience as a human being, in my short life at least, that being wrong is often one of the greatest teachers in life. I've learned a lot of things being wrong. I try not to make the same mistake twice, but I don't mind being wrong. What I care about is learning the truth and applying that truth going forward so that I don't make that kind of mistake again. Okay? So, having said that, I want to talk about an individual whose name is Syed Talib Abbas Raza. He is a Pakistani. He doesn't live in Pakistan. He lives in the western country of Australia. And he and I had a discussion recently, which I want to share with you. And I mentioned I invited him on this show, by the way, but he declined to accept that invitation. He has the right to do so. But I also have the right to share with the world what we talked about. And the only reason I'm doing this is not to get even with the guy or go after him. It's to hold his arguments up as a typical example, because this is factually correct, of what I will call and do call millennial Muslims often say when they use all of these buzzwords to support their argument, but they really don't understand what they're saying and they really don't know what they're talking about. And that can be objectively proven here. And that's the point of doing this. Again, I'm not attacking this individual on a personal basis, not at all. But what struck me about our back and forth on social media, on Facebook, which is open to the public, my Facebook page is open to the world deliberately, because I want to engage in conversations with people around the world, even if we agree to disagree. What he said was just textbook millennial Muslim stuff, which is not only factually incorrect, it's not even logically consistent. Okay? So, let's get into this, and then we'll spend the rest of the show covering some of this stuff because it's a bit detailed. And then we'll also talk about a development in communist North Korea. It was good news that the dictator of North Korea has said he's going to stop all nuclear testing. Well, we now know, thanks to intelligence and leaks, the likely reason why he's suddenly being very friendly and cooperative. It turns out that his nuclear weapons test site has collapsed and he can't blow up any bombs in it anymore. He only had one location. It was built by the Russians during the Cold War years in the 50s. And now that he's effectively destroyed it, he can't dare blow up another nuke because he doesn't want his country to become radioactive. And China, of course, won't allow that to happen either, since the winds blow from North Korea into southern China. So we'll come back to that near the end of the show. Now, let's talk about, again, the main point here, which is that we have a younger generation of millennials who are Muslims. They take to social media. They're very active. And what social media has done is it has empowered people to talk about anything they want, and that's a good thing. But when you do talk about things, you have a responsibility to basically stick to the truth. You should stick to the truth at all times, of course. And what you see in these conversations here is that there is a lot of misuse of terminology. And it is used to further what is really a propaganda argument, not a factual one. Okay? And let's show some examples here. Now, this individual I mentioned, he is just one of countless numbers of young people who say that Israel is a apartheid state. Okay? You say, wow, that's horrible. But when you look at what they're saying, they don't even understand what the word apartheid means. So what I did is I bothered looking it up in the dictionary, okay? And here's the definition. It says apartheid in South Africa. Well, Israel's not in South Africa, the last I checked. A policy or system of segregation or discrimination on grounds of race. Segregation on grounds other than race, like gender apartheid. Well, excuse me, but there's gender apartheid in the Muslim world. When's the last time that you saw men and women mix freely in some Muslim countries? They don't. They're separated. That's the way they roll. It's not right, but that's the way they do it. So the term apartheid was adopted by the successful Afrikaner National Party as a slogan in 1948 election in South Africa. Apartheid extended and institutionalized existing racial segregation. Despite rioting and terrorism at home and isolation abroad from the 1960s onwards, the white regime in South Africa maintained an apartheid system with only minor relaxations of it up until February of 1991. America used to have apartheid policies as well. We'll talk about those after the break.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV. Plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com.
Welcome back to segment 2 here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, as I was saying before the break, America, as in the USA, used to have absolute apartheid-type policies. Remember that until the Civil Rights Movement, there were black restrooms and white restrooms. There were black and white drinking fountains. Even famed boxer Muhammad Ali, as he recounted in his famous story, even after he won the gold medal for the nation in boxing, he was not allowed and wasn't served in some restaurants just because he was black. And that is wrong. It's racism, it's hatred. It can never be right. The United States, thankfully, is not like that anymore. But let's be honest, it used to be. And one of the criminal ironies of that policy that used to exist, but again, thankfully, has not for decades, is that it was still 100 years after the blacks or slaves were freed by President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. In World War II, there were black units of soldiers. They were not allowed to mix with white units of soldiers, even though they were both fighting for America, until the war was almost over. And again, that is wrong. So when this gentleman, Syed Talib Abbas Raza, accused Israel of being an apartheid state, well, that's news to anybody who understands Israel, modern day Israel. And I'll be honest, I am a Jew, okay, but I'm not Israeli. And the thing is, I know a lot of people in Israel. They're very good friends. And if it was an apartheid state, I would certainly know about it by being in my normal contact with these people. And you can try this, go on YouTube and Google Israel is an apartheid state. Now, Google owns YouTube, of course, but just do a search. And what you'll find is many videos where they interview Palestinians who live in Israel, and they ask them the question, is Israel an apartheid state? And these videos are very interesting to watch, and anybody can see them. I didn't produce them. That some of them do say yes. But then when the interviewer asks them, well, give me an example, they can't come up with an example because Israel is not. If you're a Palestinian in Israel, you can go to a doctor just like a Jew can. You can have jobs just like they do. You have a lot of freedom there. In fact, Israel is a state that welcomes other religions. Now, compare them to Hamas. You can't. And as I tried to tell Mr. Raza, there is no moral equivalent of Hamas versus Israel. Now, what his response was rather comical. He said that he agrees with that only because the oppression that Israel leashes out on the Palestinians is not the same as it does in Hamas. Okay, he's right about that, but without qualifications, it is a misleading statement. What I did in our exchange is I posted a video that is a documentary that was filmed in Gaza, showing one of the true aspects or faces of the Hamas terrorist group. And in this video, you actually see Hamas officials. They're not actors, they're real Hamas officials who run the government system over there. There's a really interesting scene where they go into a prison. And you see that there's over a dozen people crammed in a cell in inhumane conditions. You see that they have busted some of these people for selling small amounts of the drug hashish. And this jailer in the Hamas prison, he's on camera. He freely says in English, he's not an actor, he's the real thing. He says that, yes, they're going to execute this guy 1 year later because they let him stay and rot in prison for 1 year. Then they take them out and execute them. Boy, Hamas is nice guys, aren't they? Now, do Jews do that? No. Israel doesn't really have the death penalty. They have made a few exceptions over the years when they have executed Nazis, like Holocaust Nazis from World War II, like Eichmann. He deserved to be executed. You can Google his history if you don't know who I'm talking about. And a lot of millennials don't. So, what we have in Mr. Raza and others who use the term and make the false claim that Israel is an apartheid state. If it was an apartheid state, Palestinians and Jews wouldn't be able to eat together at restaurants like they do in Israel. How many Jews in Gaza eat with Palestinians under Hamas? The answer is zero. Okay? In fact, the so-called moderate Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, who was in the 12th year of his original 4-year term in office, he has said point blank that if there is ever a final two-state solution, and that's up to the Palestinians, by the way, not Israel. Israel wants a two-state solution. The Palestinians do not. He has said point blank that no Jews will be allowed in a future state of Palestine. Now, you can look it up. That's a quote from him. He said that many times. Now, can you imagine what the reaction would be from the world, and especially the Israel-bashing United Nations, if Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, or any Israeli leader were to say, well, Israel is only for Jews, let's kick all the Palestinians out? Nobody's saying that. There's also Christians that live in Israel as well as Druze, okay? As in Druze. It's yet another religious faction who has excelled in Israel because Israel is not an apartheid state. So the reason I keep coming back to this point is it bothers me as a journalist who has chronicled and written extensively about this subject, and especially topics like Pakistan and terrorism and Israel and the Palestinians and Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah. It bothers me when people state the lie that Israel is an apartheid state, and then when you ask them what the word apartheid means, they can't even tell you. They don't understand the words they're using. Instead, they're just blindly repeating just nonsense drivel, and it has no place in a dialogue that is seeking understanding. Now, the same individual, and again, I'm holding him up as an example of what I've heard from many young people who again use these words but don't really understand their meaning. He also said to me that Israel was a fascist state. Now, that is just ridiculous. It's like trying to say she's a little bit pregnant. No, there's no such thing, okay? You're either pregnant or you're not. It's binary, duh, hello. So, what is a fascist state? Well, the reason I'm going to talk about the obvious here is it's so that the people who misuse these terms and use them for propaganda purposes, because they're certainly not furthering the truth, is so that they can understand and no longer deny that they now know what the word means and that their use of it is wrong. Whether they will admit that, that's their issue, but at least for the record here and anybody listening to this, a fascist state is a state or a nation that is led by a single, all-powerful dictator. Now, Israel is not a dictatorship. Benjamin Netanyahu is their prime minister because most of the people who cast their votes, they voted, folks, put him into power. And he's been in power and has served several terms in office. And he may run for re-election again. Who knows? But the point is they had free and fair elections. The Jewish people voted him in office. So by that very dynamic, Israel cannot be a fascist state. In a fascist state, if you criticize the great leader, you can be killed. Look at North Korea. Look at Nazi Germany. Look at Mussolini, the dictator of Italy. He lived from 1922 to 1943. That's when his right-wing nationalist regime of Italy rose to power. Okay, you couldn't sit there and criticize him. You would get killed, or you would be put into a concentration camp, or your family would be locked up. Well, if anybody has bothered to attend a session of the Jewish Knesset, which is their version of parliament, I can tell you that people disagree all the time. There's some heated arguments in there, but they have the right to argue. Now, how many open debates do you see in Gaza in Hamas or in the Palestinian National Authority? You don't dare question those leaders. In fact, you make a point to hold up posters in your office so that you can be seen as a good Palestinian to go ahead and show your support for their leader. So the idea that Israel is a fascist state is ridiculous, okay? It is not an apartheid state either. People who make these claims are either ignorant or they're lying. There's no other way to sugarcoat this, and I'm not the kind of guy who sugarcoats anything. If anything, I'm very blunt, and I'd rather be blunt than politically correct, because being politically correct is really another way of saying you're phony, and I don't believe in that. Now let's talk about another term that Raza and others have used or do use or tend to use, whatever you want to call it, depends on the person. They'll say that Israel is Nazi-like. They're Nazis. Well, they're not. The very ideology of the Nazi Party automatically eliminates the possibility that Jews can be a member of the Nazi Party. Because in the twisted, hate-driven, genocidal Nazi doctrine, Jews are called Untermenschen, which is a German term for subhuman. Okay? We'll come back to this point here and continue this discussion after this commercial break.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Den.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to Cal's Corner radio show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff. Once again, I am your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, we were talking about Nazis and the use of the term Nazi to describe Jews and the behavior of the state of Israel by people who criticize Israel and young millennial types like Mr. Raza, who just don't seem to use proper terminology in their attacks against Israel. So, again, the very idea that Israel behaves or is Nazi-like, no, they're not. Israel is a democracy. Hamas is not a democracy. There are no political parties in Gaza that are viable alternatives to Hamas. Hamas, if anything, executes its opponents and calls them Jewish collaborators. That's an excuse to murder people over there. And what Mr. Raza and others have not bothered to address, and I've asked them, I've challenged them on it, they duck the issue, is that Hamas is not an elected party or leadership anymore. If anything, they're a brutal dictatorship that legally seized power. And by the way, so did Hitler and the Nazis in Germany during the Weimar Republic. Let's be clear about that. But once they got into power, they abandoned everything that they claimed that they stood for. Now, in the case of Nazi Germany, that was not the case. Hitler kept on with what got him elected. But in Hamas, it is a very different story. Again, there are no real freedoms in Gaza. If you criticize Hamas, if you were to hold a rally and criticize Hamas, they will kill you. If you hold a rally in Israel and criticize the Israeli leadership, Israel isn't going to kill you because you have the right to free speech, and Jews do exercise that right. Promise me, I know plenty of them. And if you have any Jewish friends, since when do Jewish people, are they shy about expressing their opinions? They tend not to be, because talking and having discourse is a key foundational belief of the Jewish culture. Now, there are photos that you can actually find on the internet that show Palestinians flying Nazi swastika flags. Well, do you find Nazi swastika flags being flown by Jews in Israel? No. But you do in Gaza. And the swastika, of course, when it points to the left, not the right, is the sign of the Nazi party. So tell me again, who is the Nazi, okay? Now, we must remember that Hamas was elected in a free and fair election a long time ago in Gaza. This is shortly after Yasser Arafat had died, okay? The reason Palestinians voted for Hamas over the Palestinian National Authority is because Palestinians were naive and, let's be blunt, stupid enough to think that a terrorist group could do a better job at running their government than the corrupt Fatah, or Palestinian National Authority, which was rejected by voters, and for the first time, Fatah was in the minority. So Hamas won that election. In fact, it was during the time of President George W. Bush and his then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who encouraged the idea of, let's give them a little democracy, maybe they'll grow up and transform themselves into a peaceful entity. But it never happened. Instead, within about 2 years after Hamas won the election, free and fair, against Fatah, they staged a bloody, violent coup. This is a matter of historical fact, and outright murdered, I repeat, murdered some 650 Palestinian National Authority government workers and personnel. You can still find videos of the civil war that broke out, So here you have Palestinians murdering Palestinians. And because that happened, Mahmoud Abbas, the dictator of the Palestinian National Authority, who is apparently in very serious ill health and has no viable successor because he won't bother appointing one. He's determined to go down with his own Titanic. He had to flee Gaza and resettled in the West Bank. And that's why the Palestinian people are still divided today. So when people complain that there's no two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians, well, the problem ultimately starts and ends not with Israel on this issue, but with the Palestinians. And I have challenged Raza and others to reminding them of the fact that Hamas staged a violent coup and that they're not a democracy. They're a dictatorship. And the response I get is absolute silence. Either they say I'm lying or they deny, or they say nothing. Because what can they say other than say, you're right, Hamas did do that, shame on them. But see, they won't do that. So when Raza claims that he's an activist against radical militant Islamic regimes, I have to laugh at that, because why isn't he attacking Hamas? Why is he lying about Israel instead and using words that are not in any credible dictionary? And the reason, again, we're doing this show is because this doublespeak, this lying propaganda, is typical of what I hear from young people who get on social media and work the hashtags, and it's really embarrassing for them. And I don't want you to be fooled by it. You can independently verify everything I've said here. And once again, if I'm wrong, I'll be happy to correct it. In fact, I invited Raza on my show, and he declined. I still invite him. If he wants to come on next week, I'll be happy to debate the issues. I don't know whether he will. The invitation is open, no strings attached. Let's see if he steps up and walks his talk. Who knows? It's up to him, not me. Now, let's talk about another claim he made, and I've heard this before. Again, he's just one example. I'm not picking on the guy. He said, and this is just laughable, that the U.S. effectively created the Taliban. My God, how historically ignorant such a claim is. I pointed out to him that the Taliban did not exist until October of 1994. He claims falsely that they were created when the USSR, the former Soviet Union, Russia today, invaded Afghanistan in December, on Christmas Day actually, of 1979. Well, that's news to the Taliban, because the Taliban not only have a formal founding date, they celebrate it every year. And I got news for everybody who claims otherwise, including Mr. Raza, that when I was a journalist at Daily Post newspaper, which back then was the fastest growing English language newspaper in the state of Punjab, and the state of Punjab in northern India is divided between Pakistan and India. I didn't live that far from the Pakistani border. I contacted, as a journalist, the Taliban's media office. They actually have one, just like Hamas does, Al-Qaeda does. They actually have a press office because they think they're good guys, and they love working the media and trying to fool people. And they fool plenty of people. And they told me when they were founded. It was on October 10th, 1994. And I wrote that date down. And even if you check in Wikipedia, you will see that it says very clearly the Taliban was founded on October 10th, 1994. And guess what, Mr. Raza and other people who spread this myth and lie? Every year the Taliban celebrates this date as an anniversary. So don't tell me that they were founded and funded by the U.S. to kick Russia out of Afghanistan. That is nonsense. Now, this is not to say that many of the fighters, and I don't know the percentage, and neither do they, later went on to join the Taliban, okay? But many of the so-called mujahideen, the militants who fought to liberate Afghanistan from communists and the invasion by Russia were actually conscripts. They were drafted. And it was safer to be in the Mujahideen at times than it was to stay in a village that the Russians were just going to bomb into oblivion and massacre everybody anyway. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recap the brief history of the Taliban and how it has been Pakistan, of all countries, that if any nation bears responsibility for helping create the Taliban, it is Pakistan, not the United States. And that's interesting and ironic where it concerns Mr. Raza, because he's Pakistani. Although he doesn't live in his country, he lives in Australia. So there's no denying, at least with any credibility, that the government of Pakistan has for decades supported radical Islamic-driven terrorist groups such as the Taliban to further what it deems are its interests. To understand why Pakistan does this, not that it's right to do so, one need only look at its bloody history objectively. It is a narrative largely unknown by most people in the West, and again, let's briefly review it. Let's start with Bhutto, okay, B-H-U-T-T-O. In 1971, Pakistan's then Prime Minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, started supporting Islamic fundamentalists in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Bhutto had become alarmed over the fact that the Communist Soviet Union was increasingly penetrating neighboring Afghanistan and posed a national security threat, even supplying it with tens of millions of dollars of military arms. His grand plan was to use Islamic radicals to counter their success and destabilize the regime of King Zahir Shah, who ended up being Afghanistan's last king. Now, Bhutto's target was especially King Shah's eventual successor, his cousin Muhammad Daoud Khan, who ousted Shah from power, a fierce Pashtun nationalist who also agitated for splintering Pakistan and creating what he called Pashtun Unistan. There were also Baluchis in the north who dreamed of an independent Baluchistan, and this was a nightmare to Pakistan's leader, Bhutto. We'll be back after this break and finish explaining this story.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
I'm William S. Peckham. If you enjoy a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love my novel, From Out of the Woodwork. It's the story of a young Toronto contractor, Sean Kennedy, who buys derelict homes, guts them, and turns them into multifamily dwellings. Slums just waiting to happen. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, the house fights back. Former owners unexpectedly come out of the woodwork as he starts the destruction. The apparitions come to him when he touches old books, reads hidden letters, rummages through old boxes, finds a locket, or reads a discovered manuscript of a murder mystery. From Out of the Woodwork will take you from 1899 to the horror of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. Check out From Out of the Woodwork on my website, www.williamspeckham.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. And once again, the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. So as I was saying, Bhutto's target was especially King Shah's eventual successor, his cousin Muhammad Daoud Khan, who had ousted Shah from power. He was a fierce Pashtun nationalist who also agitated for splintering Pakistan and creating what he called a Pasht-Unistan. There were also Baluchis in the north who dreamed of an independent Baluchistan, as well as Sindhis in what was once Western India who longed for reuniting with Mother India instead of being forced to be part of Pakistan after the partition between the two countries happened in 1947 and redrew the borders using inconsistent ethnic and religious considerations. In other words, when the British divided India and helped create Pakistan, they kind of did it recklessly. There were entire communities and ethnic groups who were forced to live on one side or the other. There was a huge land swap. Millions of people were displaced and hundreds of thousands were killed. And the West is largely ignorant of this. I've actually met several survivors of those times. They're elderly people now, and the stories are just horrifying. There were then religious wars that broke out where Muslims would kill Hindus. Hindus would later go to war against Sikhs. It was just a bloody mess, literally. So Pakistan's splintering was very much on Bhutto's mind, especially after the eastern part of this nation officially declared its independence from Pakistan, and with brazen and open assistance from India, Russia, and Afghanistan, formed the independent state of Bangladesh, a crime in Pakistan's mind its government still today, Pakistan's government, has not forgiven. So convincing Islamic militants to fight against Russian and Western influence was easy, especially since communists claim to be atheists, which is worse in the minds of jihadi types than being a mere infidel or unbeliever. Militant Islamic nuts actually hate atheists more than they do Jews, Hindus, and Christians. They consider it a religious duty, quote unquote, to either forcibly convert atheists or kill them. Now, that's what would happen. Even the terrorist leader of al-Qaeda, who's now dead, thankfully, Osama bin Laden, said he would have no problem with George Bush if he would just convert to Islam. Mighty nice guy, right? So Bhutto's plan showed some early signs of success, enough to continue the harassing tactics. It was taken to a whole new level after he was deposed and killed by his successor, General Mohammad Zia-ul-Haq, who then built on Bhutto's legacy of arming Islamic radicals and creating the foundational framework for the terrorism dynamics that still exist today and drive too much of Pakistan's self-proclaimed national security policy and their professed strategic need to have room to maneuver in the West at Afghanistan's territorial integrity and expense, of course. So Pakistan funded several attempts to topple Khan's government, intending to replace it with Islamic radicals it could control. All of these efforts failed until 5 years later in 1978, when Khan was eventually assassinated. In other words, they finally got him. While he was finally dead, the problem now for Pakistan was not that he was no longer alive. It was instead that he was executed and replaced by Hafizullah Amin, a leader in the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, the PDPA, which was a communist organization. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, their KGB-supplied Spetsnaz commandos stormed his palace and executed him, putting into power Babrak Karmal, Moscow's puppet and stooge. Now Pakistan had an even bigger problem than worrying over what various separatists longed to do. The Russians were next door and could invade any time they wanted to. Now let's talk about Saudi Wahhabiyya because it's relevant here. The world became rightfully alarmed when the former communist USSR invaded Afghanistan on December 25th in 1979 during the late stage of American President Jimmy Carter's term in office. Prior to this, Pakistan was already well on the road to indoctrinating and training radical and fanatical Muslims to go fight its various causes. This would include doing everything from launching cross-border attacks against India, which Pakistan still does today. And why isn't Mr. Raza condemning Pakistan's support for terrorism against India? You'd have to ask him. And what they were trying to do was further destabilize Afghanistan. You see, Pakistan achieved this buildup of radical Islamist cadres by cutting a cold, calculating, and sinister deal with the Saudis, advocates of intolerant Islamic Wahhabism. As I've reported many times over the years, thanks to Saudi funding, over 10,000 so-called religious schools or madrasas were built with Saudi financial assistance in Pakistan. The results were predictable. Tens of thousands of young Muslims were brainwashed to hate and kill. You see, in totalitarian governments, in communist China, in the former Nazi Germany, they target the youth because if you can brainwash young children into growing up to become killers, they will do your bidding for you and they'll think they're right. And you can easily find videos today on the internet, in YouTube, that shows Palestinian children being militarized by Hamas and even the Palestinian National Authority. They are raised and brainwashed to hate Jews and trained to kill them and even slit their throats. And I'm not exaggerating. You can actually watch the footage of these so-called summer camps. Now, try to find the same equivalent in Israel of summer camps where Jewish children are taught to kill Palestinians and slit their throats. It doesn't exist. That's a little inconvenient fact for people like Mr. Raza. So it was these groups that the Pakistanis offered to the United States and its CIA to now fight against the Soviets when Carter and later Ronald Reagan were president. While the Russians left Afghanistan, humiliated and defeated, in the chaotic aftermath of their departure, the remnants of the former Soviet regime, now led by Mohammad Najibullah, continued to do battle with radical Islamic militants, including what was now the Taliban, until they captured Kabul, Afghanistan's capital city, and quickly executed him. So Pakistan had finally achieved what it wanted via its decades-long support for Islamic militants. It had a trusted partner in the Taliban, at least in theory, that had no interest in breaking up the country of Pakistan, and if anything, was grateful for Pakistan's help. One of the widespread liberal myths, which have become popular in the media, is that the CIA created the Taliban in the 1980s, so this group could fight against the Russians who had invaded the country. Well, if only history were that simple. It isn't. The Taliban, I repeat, was not even created until October 10th, 1994, years after the Soviets left. In fact, the Soviet Union ceased to exist in the fall of 1991, and that's just historical fact. And I know that's a fact because I was in the former East Germany during that time when Russia fell. I witnessed its collapse firsthand and the impact it had. I even saw Russian troops discarding their uniforms. So I was there. And even if I wasn't there, there's no question that the Soviet Union ceased to exist in the fall of 1991. That would be 3 years before the Taliban even formally existed. So while some of its members are fighters who had battles against the Russians, most were forced conscripts who deserted after they were ousted initially from power by the U.S. military in late 2001. Now, what I've just said to you is an article that I wrote in the year 2014. You do the math, that's 4 years ago. I wrote that when I was a reporter with the Daily Post. Now, I find the timing of this article, or the irony of it, to be this. What I wrote 4 years ago is 100% relevant and completely destroys the arguments of Mr. Raza and others who make this false, phony claim. And there's no excuse for it because in his case, and others I've heard this same stupid argument from, they're from Pakistan. So don't tell me they don't know their country's own history, okay? They may have been alive at the time. If not, they certainly know it from being Pakistani. It's not hidden from them. But Pakistan is responsible more than any other nation for helping create and fund the Taliban. In fact, in another article that was published 4 years ago, I actually obtained top secret memos that identified the names of the commanders from the Pakistani intelligence agency who were training the Taliban fighters. There was a rather humorous note in those memos where they had to separate the Punjabis from the Pashtuns because they didn't get along. But other than that, Pakistan was pleased with the results of what they were able to achieve. And we must remember that Saudi Arabia, although it has now renounced terrorism now and extremism, they weren't that way in the past. In fact, they exported it around the world and funded it because they cut a deal with the Wahhabi leadership, which basically went like this. In exchange for not criticizing or attacking the Saudi royal family, the Saudis agreed to fund radical jihad militant Islam around the world so that it would become everybody's problem except the Saudis. And the Saudis no longer behave that way. They're even pro-Israel now. Israeli bound air flights from India are now allowed to fly over Saudi airspace. So the bottom line is, again, to recap, Israel is not an apartheid state. Jews are not Nazis. It's not possible. And it's not a fascist state. And until Hamas and the Palestinians get their act together and there's a single, unified, progressive democracy in Palestine, one that cares about its people rather than continues to oppress it, and there's a single unified voice that speaks for the Palestinians, there can never be peace. You can't blame Israel for boycotting Hamas because Hamas really has no moral right to exist.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.